All right, so what we need to do to be able to play over this Maiden Voyage tune is to first figure out the tune itself. I recommend that you listen to the original recording of Herbie Hancock's Maiden Voyage. It's kind of a early recording that you can find of what's called modal jazz. So what modal jazz is a specific type of a jazz that got kind of used in the '60s, and its real roots are from like impressionism in art. You see impressionism affect like Western art music or classical music, earlier in the century, and now it's made its way over to jazz. And this term modal jazz gets its name for we're going to make jazz using these kind of modes of the major scale, especially. And you'll have these long periods of one chord or one mode that you'll hear, and then it'll change to a new one, establishing a new tonal center. And this happens across this whole piece. Another things that you find in modal jazz, you have kind of like these bass grooves or ostinatos that hold down the groove for long periods of time, and they really kind of help drive home that droning that you need to get the mode established, where there's not really a chord as much as there is just this solid drone that we're comparing all these modes or different chords to. So the next thing that we need to look at is the modes themselves. So a mode is just a fancy name for like a scale. Okay, and what we're going to do here is we're going to look at the relative modes of the major scale. So let me explain what those are. Let's say we have a C major scale. We all know C to C, no accidentals. Just C to E, F, G, A, B, C, back and forth. That's the major mode. Now, you'll see it has a kind of a nickname or a Greek name, the Ionian mode. So when we refer to the C major scale or any major scale in the terms of like modal playing, you'll hear a lot of times that word Ionian to denote that, we're creating modal music here. So that's C to C. But what if we use the same notes and go from D to D? We get a different scale called the D Dorian. Same thing if we go to the Phrygian mode, the next one, the E Phrygian, go to E with those notes. Then F Lydian will take us on the F to F. Then the fifth mode, G to G, takes us through G Mixolydian. And this one, A to A, we know already as A minor. The fancy name for it is Aeolian. And then we have the B Locrian mode, the seventh mode, the last mode. And so what you want to do is you want to pick a major scale you're real comfortable with and just practice the scale just like we did there with the C major scale. It doesn't have to be C major, but it sure doesn't hurt. That's typically an easy scale for most instruments. Now, the best way to practice these relative modes is to do just what I did, but also remember that your 2-5-1 key center exercises, those are part of the all region tryout material. All they are is taking the second mode, the Dorian, then the fifth mode, the Mixolydian, and then the first mode, the major mode or the Ionian mode, and you play them in a succession. So in case of the C, I could play D Dorian. Notice we play up to the 9 in these, and then I could play G Mixolydian. And then C Ionian or C major. Same thing. So that's where these come from, is the 7 modes of the major scale. And we're just simply playing 2 and 5 and then 1. Now, another thing about these 7 modes is there's 3 categories that we put them in. The major mode, the 4th mode, the Lydian, and the 5th mode, Mixolydian. Those are all what's called major modes because they build major arpeggios. That should make sense because it's the 1, 4, and the 5 chord. You've heard of The 1, 4, and the 5 chord in pop music, they use those chords a lot. So those three major modes are also what you call the primary chords, 1, 4, and 5. Now the minor modes would be like the Dorian on the 2, Phrygian on the 3, and A minor or Aeolian on the 6. So those three modes are the minor modes. And then there's one oddball in there. It's that 7th mode. That's the diminished mode because it's arpeggio builds a diminished arpeggio. So here's this B Locrian. So you also kind of want to keep them up in your head in that kind of way too. Not only knowing the order of the modes, but which ones are major, which ones are minor, and that 7th one being diminished. 1, 4, and 5 are major, 2, 3, and 6 are minor, and then 7 is diminished. So once we've kind of got that down, let's think about a way to remember the order of these modes in terms of when they're relative. Just one more note about relative modes. You can think of them like your own relatives, right? You all share the same blood, the same DNA. So relative modes, like in this case, are all going to have those notes from the C major scale, all natural. So they're relatives, they're related to each other. And let's think of like a little saying to remember these. I came up with this one in tuba lessons when I was in like 11th grade. And it was, I don't punch like Muhammad Ali lately. So Ionian is I, Dorian is don't, punch is Phrygian, like is Lydian, Muhammad would be Mixolydian, Ali is Aeolian, and then lately it would be Locrian. That's a silly little saying that you can remember to help you recall these relative modes. So once we've got the relative modes down, now what we need to do is line all these modes up off of one note and play them together. So what we're going to do is we're going to line up every note starting on a C and play them in this particular order. Lydian major, Mixolydian, Dorian, minor, Phrygian, then the last we'll play the Locrian mode. Let's play these up and down, each one in half notes to really listen. Because really what we're trying to listen to is the effect or the quality of each note that it has on this drone note. Here we go. Okay, so here's the drone note. There's a C. Let's play the C Lydian mode, whatever that is for you. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, half notes. 1, 2. There we go. So it sounds like a major scale, but that 4th note is a F sharp. So it's like, to make a Lydian mode, you could say, well, we could take a major scale and raise the 4th note a half step, and that would make it Lydian. Let's move to Mixolydian, let's move to major. 1, 2, major scale, half notes. We know that scale. Let's move on to Mixolydian. Change the B to a B flat, the 7th note. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that scale kind of sounds like a major scale too, except for the 7th note is not quite right. It's down a half step, right? So those are the 3 major modes. We did Lydian first, then major, and then the Mixolydian. Notice we went from the order of what's brightest to darkest. So, in other words, we had the scale that had the sharp, and we took away the sharp, then we added a flat. So things are getting darker, you could say. All right, let's do the next mode, Dorian. 1, 2, 3, 4. Dorian mode, notice we had to flatten the third of that mixolydian, which makes it a minor mode. You could say the Dorian's like a minor scale, but the sixth note is 1.5 step higher. So let's go ahead and play the minor mode now, or the Aeolian mode out of C. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sounds a little more somber, a little darker than the Dorian did, because we added that A flat, which made that sixth note an A flat. All right, let's go to the Phrygian. Here's that weird new note, the second note. 1, 2, Phrygian. So it's like a minor scale, but that second note is real tense because it's right next to that C, that D flat. All right, last mode, the Locrian mode. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's what those modes sound like against that solid root note or that drone note. So, what we want to do is take a little collection here of, why those modes sounded like they did. So, the biggest reason is because of the intervallic content that makes each mode different. Notice every mode had a different note. And you can see here there's these chart of intervals. So intervals are just distances of note from note to note. And we can measure those distances in half steps, or the smallest unit. Basically, a half step is as close as a note can get to one another in a fingering chart without being the same pitch. So, 1/2 step away from C would be going up to like D flat. It's a real tense note. We heard the second note of that, like that Phrygian mode, a minor second, or the Locrian even. Then the D natural is like a major second. That's like what we heard in like the major scale, C, D, all right? Then C to E flat is a minor third, 3/2 steps. We heard that in all those minor modes as the third note, like the minor scale. Minor third. Okay, major third, 4/2 steps. That's like all those major modes, the third note. C to E, right? C to F is a perfect fourth. Notice these perfect intervals have a really pure kind of sound. Very pure, very not wavy, very like blocky sounding. So this perfect fourth was in all the scales except for the Lydian, because that note was sharped, right? Now we go to that next one. Several options for 6/2 steps. What you can call this. We can call it the augmented fourth, like in that Lydian scale. Or it could also be found as a flattened fifth, like in that Locrian mode, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that G flat would be a diminished fifth, whereas the F sharp would be an augmented fourth. And you can just loosely refer to either one of those as a tritone. It makes sense because 6/2 steps is the same thing as 3 whole steps, tritone. Okay, and then 7/2 steps, a perfect fifth. That interval was in all of our scales except for that Locrian, where the fifth was that diminished fifth, right? Notice that perfect fifth's another perfect interval. Really smooth intervallic sounds there. Nothing crunchy at all, just real pure. All right, then we have the minor 6. going from C to A flat. That was like in like the minor scale. It's real tense interval because it wants to resolve back down to that perfect fifth. Then we have the major six, like C to A. That was like in all those major modes, even the Dorian mode. Whole step away from the fifth. Now let's go to the 10 half steps. A minor seventh, C to B flat. That was in like pretty much all the modes except for the major and the Lydian, right? So you could be like Mixolydian was the first one we saw it. That seventh note. Then we have a major 7. It was 11 half steps. It's like almost all the way up. Real dissonant, real wavy. It's like that second to last note of the major scale, the Lydian mode. And then finally the perfect octave, the perfect interval. That interval is just pure, no waves. If it's in tune, it should be perfectly still in its intervallic movement. Now, just to summarize the sounds of these intervals in terms of what's called consonants and dissonance. So consonants are the sounds that aren't as wavy, but kind of are more agreeable and sweet on the ears, like these perfect intervals, like the octaves, or the fifth, or the fourth. Those are the most consonant intervals, because they don't move. They're very still when they get played together. Real kind of blocky. And then these thirds and sixes are kind of like necks. So like, this minor third, C to E flat. It's got a little waviness, but it's still kind of sweet. Same thing with E natural. And also with the sixth, this A flat. A little bit wavy, kind of reminds me of the minor six, kind of reminds me of the major third. And then the major six is a little wavy, kind of sounds like the minor third. And then also, these sevenths and seconds are kind of dissonant. So like the major second, C to D, pretty dissonant. But then the C to D flat, now that one, that's real dissonant, just right on top of each other. And the sevenths are also the same way. Like the major seventh, real dissonant too. C to B, lots of waves there. And then C to B flat, not as wavy, kind of like the major second. And then this other really wavy sound, of course, is this tritone interval. That's very disagreeable interval, very dissonant. Now, this consonance and dissonance is all about perspective. I'm just kind of giving you a place to start thinking about. But another thing with these intervals is each of these intervals have a what's called a inversion. So notice we're going up to a certain note, and if we wanted to find that same note going down, what you do, you have to invert the interval. So if it's whatever number it is, make it add up to 7, and if it's a major quality, flip it to minor. If it's an augmented, flip it to diminished, and if it's perfect, keep it there. Let's do a few examples of that real quick. So like if I wanted to go from a C down to a D flat instead of up a minor second rather to a D flat, I could guess, so 2 plus what equals 9? 7. And it's a minor second now, so it needs to be a major. So if I want to go C down to D flat, that would be a major 7th. Let's do another one that's perfect. Okay, so C to F is a perfect 4th. So what if I wanted to go C down to F? Well, 4 plus what equals 9? 5. So we're going to have some kind of 5th. So perfect stays the same. So if we want to go C down to F, that'd be a perfect 5th. When we inverted that. Let's do one more. Let's do one of these. So if we go C up to F sharp, that's that augmented 4th. Now if we want to go C down to F sharp, so 4 plus what equals 9? 5. Augmented flips to diminished, so we would have a diminished 5th going down to F sharp. So really learn these intervals, get to know them, get their sounds, practice with the drone, with these parallel modes. That's the key. If you can memorize the sound of these modes and open your ears to these intervals, it's going to make you a really good improviser because you'll be able to hear everything all the time. One final note about these parallel modes. you notice if we go from the brightest Lydian all the way down to the darkest, the Locrian, you can find the pattern of accidentals inside the circle of fifths. So, the order of the flats is B, E, A, D, G, C, F, or BEAD, greatest common factor. And the order of the sharps is just the opposite of that. F, C, G, D, A, E, B. So notice when we went from the Lydian mode to the major mode, we stripped away the F sharp because it's the first sharp. And then we went from the major mode to the Mixolydian, we added the B flat. And to get to the next mode, we added the E, then the A, then the D, and the G, and so forth. So you can kind of see how that works too. This is a great tool to help you kind of grab modes that are really close. And then the other thing too is if you have trouble like with your sight reading and you want to practice and do more, just read old pieces that you've already sight read out of like easy books and change the key signature. Make it playing in a different mode. So if it's the key of B flat major with 2 flats, consider stripping one away and playing B flat Lydian. Or maybe you want to add a couple flats to B flat major and turn to B flat Dorian. You can do that. It really helps your sight reading and kind of makes more music out of the music that you already have. Another quick tip, learning to play jazz is like half practicing and the other half literally just listening to the records. If you're going to improv good on this tune, Maiden Voyage, you're going to want to be listening a lot, like every day. Like the first day, I would listen to it like 10, 20 times. Just put it on repeat and just let it soak into you. And then every day as you do these exercises that are to be followed on this video, listen to it once or twice again, and you're going to hear things different every day that you can pick up and learn that you couldn't hear the day before. So after you listen to a tune, the way to get into really getting to work on improvising is to learn the chord changes, also known as the changes. So these modal tunes typically have very few changes because the changes last for a long period of time. But typically, a modal tune will have 3 types of changes. One is a major type chord. This could be like major 7, major 9, major 13, even a major something chord with a sharp 11 that denotes the Lydian mode, which is a good tip because when we see the major 7 chord in a modal tune, it's going to be the Lydian mode. Now, we don't have any of those major type chords in Maiden Voyage, but if we did, we would use the Lydian mode over those chords. For example, if you saw like a C major 7 chord, we know we want to use C Lydian. So you could go to the major scale, sharp the 4th note, and turn to Lydian and be good to go. Another example would be like if we had like, G Lydian. Well, you have G major scale, sharp the 4th note, C sharp, boom, then we got G Lydian. So if you saw G major 7, you play that G Lydian scale, everything's going to sound really good. The second type of chord type is the dominant type. That's like a 7, a 9, 11, 13, or sometimes you see these with a suspension like you do in Maiden Voyage. Those are called sus chords, and you're going to want to use the Mixolydian mode on that one. And the easiest way to find the Mixolydian mode is just get your major scale sheet out and flatten the 7th note. So if it was D 9 sus, like the first chord of this song, you find D major scale, 7th note to C sharp, flatten it to C, boom. Now you got D Mixolydian to play with. Very easy operation. And then finally, you want to do the Dorian mode for the minor type chords. The minor type chords are like minor 7, minor 9, minor 11, minor 13, minor 6, 9, stuff like that. Those are implying the Dorian mode. And I think the quickest way to get the Dorian mode is like you could just use the major scale sheet again, and you could flatten the 3rd and flatten the 7. So if we had C sharp, Dorian, C sharp major scale, you'd have E sharp as the 3rd, now it's E natural, and then you would have a B sharp as the 7th, flatten it to B, and there you go. You'd have C sharp Dorian waiting for you. Another way to think about Dorian is it's just the second mode of a major scale. So you could just go back a whole step and play that major scale notes and you'd be the same way. So yeah, that is a good tool to start working on. That way, when you read other tunes besides Maiden Voyage that are modal tunes, you know what you're doing and what scales to pick over what chords. It's that easy. There's just three types. The major is the Lydian mode. The dominant chords are the Mixolydian, and the minor chords are the Dorian. So now that we know the scales to use, before we get to work on the scales, what I like to do is do two approaches. Number one is just playing the chord tones. So in this sheet, you can see the chord tones, and we're going to do a little bit of that. Maybe not in that order, but in these examples, we'll be focusing on chord tones for the first three examples or so. And then we're going to use some more like blues scales over each one of the chords. And there's a blues scale that we use for each one of these. And finally, we're going to look at kind of mixing around those blues scales and some of that chord tones and some melodic patterns, kind of get a little more flexible with our technique and these note choices over each chord. And then the last bit, I've got a written out solo that we can play that will use these strategies in like a real solo that I played that I went back and transcribed after the fact. So we'll learn that. First example is chord tones going up.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Next example, chord tones going down.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, here we have the chord tones going up and then back down.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
All right, let's use the blues scale that belongs to each one of these chords. It's a good example.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
All right, so here's a pattern that kind of skips around chord tones. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of idea.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
This one is one of my favorite patterns. I usually play this one in triplets, but I've modified it here to make it work with straight eighth notes.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Here's a solo I wrote out using all these concepts together.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
All right, good job making it to the first half of this lesson where we just focused on using those chord tones that are primary to the chords themselves. They sound really good, and you heard you can even make a solo out of that if you really wanted to. Now we get a chance to use the modes like we talked about from the beginning. Well, kind of. Yes, we're going to use the modes, but we're going to focus on the parent scale. So basically, when we figure out what mode we want to use over every chord, we're going to revert that mode to just the major scale that it comes from. That way we can be more off the cuff and more creative with it. That forces us to use our ear and think less. When you play jazz, that's always better. Now let's look at some examples of this to kind of help ourselves out. So if we had like a major type of chord, like C major 7, which we know we got to play the Lydian, so that's C Lydian. What we're going to want to do is find that major scale that C Lydian comes from. And the way you do that, you can ask yourself this. Okay, so we know the notes of C Lydian have 1 sharp. What major key has 1 sharp? The answer is G. So when I see C major 7, I'm thinking, oh, that's G major, or I come up with like a little formula. So like, what's the 5th note of C? Well, it's G. So every time I see a major type of chord, I'm just going to go up to the 5th and play a major scale. And for some reason, when I do that, all my ideas are just way better. Let's look at a few more examples of this. So like B flat major 7. We want to play B flat Lydian. What's the 5th note of B flat? F. So when I see B flat major 7, I'm just playing F major. E flat major 7. We want E flat Lydian. What's the 5th note of E flat major 7? B flat. So we're just going to play B flat major. It's going to sound like E flat Lydian because it's the same thing. Okay, then finally D major. So we want D Lydian. What's the 5th note of D major? Well, it's A. So we're going to just play an A major scale over that D major 7 chord. And it's going to make it sound like D Lydian. But we don't have to do the calculus because we just can go to the 5th and play the major. That kind of stuff is really helpful, especially if you have a major scale technique under your hands and your fingers. A lot of band kids, I know you've been working on scale sheets for a lot longer than you've been looking at modes. So that'll help a little bit. Let's consider this on the minor type of chords now. So if we had like a D minor 7 or a D Dorian, we know Dorian is the 2nd mode of the major scale. So that's going to be C major. So let's come up with another little formula to figure out what major scale to play from a minor type of chord. It looks to me like we can just go down a whole step. So D to C, sure enough, is a whole step. Let's try and do a few more of these to get a little better. So E minor 7, we want E Dorian. Let's go down a whole step from E. Oh, yep, that's the same thing. D major is the same as E Dorian. B minor 7, we want B Dorian. Let's go down a whole step. Oh, there's A major. So there we go. Same thing, B Dorian, A major, same thing. C sharp minor 7, we want C sharp Dorian. Go down a whole step from C sharp. It will be B major. That will be really important for you C people on that bridge. And then E flat minor 7, you have E flat Dorian. So what's a whole step below E flat? D flat major. Trumpets, you're going to, and tenor saxes, you're going to want that chord, that 2nd chord of the bridge too. All right, let's do a little bit of the dominant types. D9 sus is this D mixolydian, but it's going to end up being G major. So let's think about a formula. Okay, D compared to G. So G is the 4th note of D major. So anytime we see a dominant type of chord, we can just go to the 4th note and play that major scale. Let's look at another few examples to get this down. So F9 sus, what F mixolydian. What's the 4th note of F? B flat. Boom. B flat major is the same as F mixolydian. E9 sus, we want E mixolydian. What's the 4th note of E major scale? A. So there you go. You play the A major scale, you're going to sound just like E mixolydian. It's the same notes. And then like E flat. What's the 5th note of E, or the 4th note, sorry, of E flat? A flat. And that will give you that parent scale on the dominant types. So in summary, the Lydian type, we went up to the 5th note of the major scale of that chord and played the major scale. And then we went to the down a whole step on the minor type, on the Dorian. And then we went to the fourth note of the major scale to find what parent major scale belongs to the dominant type. So remember that, and that will come in super duper handy. So let's learn some exercise using the 4 parent major scales that we need over each 4 of these chords. All right, this exercise just goes up 9 notes of a major scale, comes back down, and plays a little major 7 arpeggio.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
All right, this exercise uses the same scales, but we played it in thirds.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
So this next exercise is about triad pairs, and I'm going to go ahead and do a little quick explanation about what those are. So basically the idea is once you found your parent major scale, right, that would be 1 in the terms of modality. And we remember that 4 and 5 also were a major type of mode because they had a major arpeggio built in. So for instance, if we're in like C major, you know that 1 has a major arpeggio. 4 would be F Lydian, which also has a major arpeggio. And then that's G Mixolydian. It's a major mode because it has a G major arpeggio. So basically the idea is that you have 2 major arpeggios a whole step apart in every major scale based on the 4th and the 5th. You even play like inversions of those. You keep going up like that. So basically you're going to hear the 4th and the 5th of those major arpeggios from each one of these modes kind of juxtaposed in these exercises. Okay, here's the triad pairs.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Here's a little solo using all these concepts. I just played it and wrote it down after the fact. Here it is.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
So one quick final note about the audition itself. Because Maiden Voyage is kind of a long form, one thing you want to be prepared for, and by that I mean you definitely probably want to be prepared for it, is you may be asked to play like half of it with the head and the other half with improv. So you play the A section, the repeated part, just the head, and then the solo you will play when it gets to the bridge. I'll do a demonstration of that you hear the head in the beginning and then the solo on the bridge.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Here I'll take a solo. In closing, this is a great opportunity, not only for you to, learn a little bit about improvisation, but to get more connected to the fundamentals about chord changes and modes and what modes to use over what chords, playing with simple chord progressions that last a long time, so you can really experiment with the other aspects of music like rhythm and dynamics and articulation, and turning these small little rhythmic ideas into motives or motifs. So like one thing I do when I play, I just say 3 random numbers from 1 to 7. I may pick 3, 5, and 6. And so I'll start my first idea thinking about 3 notes, then a 5 note, then 6 notes. I might play something like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's my idea. And it's cool to do that. As long as you keep everything in time and some kind of rhythmic structure, you can use these kind of randomized groupings of your notes to kind of find some ideas to kind of hold on to that are easy to remember. As easy to remember as just a few numbers. So experiment with that. Good luck. Spend lots of time in this kind of improvisation, especially if you're just starting. You're going to get a lot luckier, a lot better sounds, have a lot more control over this kind of music because the chords don't move as fast. So you have lots of time to really listen and develop your own ideas over just one sound. Good luck.